The night Route 66 swallowed that pickup whole. Nobody should have survived it. The truck left the road at 70 miles an hour, rolled twice, and landed hood down in a drainage ditch with a sound like the desert cracking open. No streetlights out there, no witnesses, just frozen scrubland and a wind that cut straight through everything, and the headlights of one lone Harley catching the dust still hanging in the dark air where the guardrail used to be. The rider stopped. He didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have. But he saw something moving in the wreckage, something small, climbing out through a shattered window, arms waving. And he pulled over because that's what you do when you're a certain kind of man, the kind the world already finished with, the kind with nothing left to lose. What he found in that ditch was going to cost him everything he thought he knew about his own life. And he was going to ride straight into it anyway. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Like the video if you're staying until the end. Because I promise you, you will not see this coming. The cold came in from the northwest that night, rolling off the high desert like something with a grudge. It wasn't the kind of cold that invited you to bundle up and wait it out. It was the kind that found the gaps, the space between your collar and your jaw, the half-inch your glove didn't cover, the place behind your knees where the wind hit when you leaned into a curve at 60 miles an hour on an empty stretch of Route 66, somewhere between Kingman and nowhere. Cade Mercer had been riding for 6 hours straight. His lower back had gone numb around hour 3, which he'd learned years ago to treat as a mercy rather than a warning. The Harley under him, a battered road king with 140,000 miles on the odometer and a front fork he'd welded himself twice, growled at a frequency he felt in his back teeth. He didn't mind. The bike was honest. It told you the truth about the road underneath you, every crack and hollow, every place the asphalt had given up trying. He appreciated honesty in machines more than he did in people. There was nothing out here but darkness and white highway lines and the occasional ghost of a jackrabbit crossing too fast to be real. The kind of landscape that either made a man feel small or made him feel like the last man alive. And Cade had stopped being sure which one was worse about 4 years ago, on a different night, in a different desert, when they handed him a folded flag and told him a name he already knew was gone. He didn't think about that now. He didn't think about much on the long rides. That was the point. He almost missed it. The gouge in the guardrail caught his headlight at the last second, a raw crescent of sheared metal, bright silver against the weathered surface, fresh enough to still smell like sparks if you were close enough. He was close enough. He registered it the way a man with his training registered everything, as data, as a change in pattern, as something that didn't belong. His thumb found the brake before his brain finished the sentence. He pulled over, killed the engine. Sat for 3 seconds in the sudden, brutal silence of the desert at 2 a.m, listening. There, something. Movement in the ditch below the rail. A shape that was too deliberate for a deer, too small for an adult standing. He swung off the bike and his boots hit gravel, and he was already moving down the embankment before he'd made a conscious decision to do it. Old instinct, old training, the kind of thing that doesn't ask permission. The truck had rolled. He could see that from the way it sat, nose down in the drainage ditch, the cab crumpled on the driver's side, one wheel still spinning slow. Not burning, which was the first good sign. The windshield was gone. The roof had compressed 2 inches on the impact side, maybe more. He ran the math fast and ugly. Anyone in the driver's seat without a seatbelt was probably dead. Passenger side, rear bench, those were the questions. Then he saw the boy. 10 years old, maybe 11. Dark hair matted against his forehead, a cut above his left eyebrow bleeding in that slow, determined way head wounds do. The kind that looked worse than it was, but was still plenty bad. He'd come out through the back window, which told Cade he'd been in the back seat, which meant he'd been seatbelted and had enough sense or luck to get himself loose once the truck stopped moving. He was standing in the ditch in sneakers and a hoodie that wasn't close to warm enough, and he was waving both arms at Cade like his life depended on it. Because it did. "My mom," the kid said. That was all. Just those 2 words, but the way he said them, flat, focused, the way children sound when they're past the place where crying helps, told Cade everything. "I got you," Cade said. "You hurt?" "My head," Not bad. Mom's still inside. Cade was already at the passenger door. It was jammed. He found the frame, braced his boot against the rocker panel, and pulled with everything he had. The same physics he'd used in worse places than this, on worse nights than this, on doors that were part of burning vehicles in countries that didn't appear on the maps they'd been given. The door shrieked and gave. She was in the passenger seat, which meant she hadn't been driving, which opened a question Cade didn't have time for. Seatbelt still fastened, head resting against the deployed airbag, which had probably saved her life and definitely broken something in her face from the force of it. He could see the swelling already starting along her cheekbone. Breathing. That was what mattered. He checked her neck with practiced hands, no obvious deformity. He moved to her wrist, found the pulse, too fast, but strong. What's her name? He called back over his shoulder. Sophia, the boy said. Sophia Mercer. Cade went very still. It was just a name. People had the same name all the time. It was a common name. He had no reason to react to it, no logical reason at all, and he had spent years being a man who operated on logic, because the alternative was the kind of thing that happened to people who stopped functioning, and he had not come this far to stop functioning in a ditch off Route 66 in the middle of the night over a name. Sophia Mercer, he repeated, and his voice came out even. She have any other injuries? Did she hit anything else in the cab? The steering wheel, the boy said. She was reaching for it. She tried to grab it when the tire blew. She's the one who was driving. Right. She'd been driving. Passenger seat, but driving. The driver's door was on the crushed side. She'd climbed over. Or the impact had thrown her. He'd piece it together later. What mattered now was getting her out without making anything worse. He worked her free over the next 4 minutes with the focused economy of someone who'd done this before. She made a sound once. A soft, involuntary noise that was half pain and half something deeper, the sound a person makes when the body registers threat before the brain wakes up. And her hand moved, grasping at the air until it found Cade's forearm and held on with surprising strength. You're okay, he said. I've got you. Don't move your head. Her eyes didn't open, but the grip tightened. The boy, he hadn't given his name yet, and Cade hadn't asked, helped hold the door as Cade got her clear and laid her flat on the rocky ground beside the ditch with his own jacket under her head. The wind hit immediately, vicious and specific, and Cade pulled the jacket closer around her without thinking. He'd called it in before he'd even reached the truck, one-handed on his phone while sliding down the embankment. State emergency line, location pulled from the GPS display on his handlebar. ETA from the nearest hospital was 40 minutes minimum. More, in this cold, on these roads, with a crew that didn't know this stretch. He sat back on his heels and looked at the woman in the pale blue light of his phone, and something shifted in his chest the way tectonic plates shift. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a grinding deep rearrangement of something that had been locked in place for a very long time. It wasn't possible. He knew it wasn't possible. And yet, the shape of her jaw, the specific curve of the nose, the way the hair fell across the left temple, even tangled and bloodied as it was. The freckle at the corner of her mouth, barely visible in the dark, but there, precisely where it had always been, in a face he had memorized and then spent years trying to forget. He was dreaming. He'd fallen asleep somewhere around Barstow and put the bike into a ditch, and this was the fever dream of a man whose body was shutting down in the cold, and that was the only explanation that made any sense. The boy crouched beside him. He'd been watching Cade with the specific, unsettling attention of a child who has learned to read adult faces for danger. And now he was looking at Cade's right forearm, where the jacket had fallen back when Cade braced himself, and the tattoo was visible. The one Cade had stopped trying to explain to people. The one he'd gotten in Kandahar province, in a place with no electricity and a guy with a machine running off a car battery because he'd been 24 years old and certain he was going to die there, and he'd wanted her name to be the last thing he wore. Sophia. Simple. Black ink. His own handwriting, transferred. Right forearm, where he'd always see it. The boy looked at the tattoo, looked at his mother's face, looked back at Cade. How do you know her name? He asked. The question was so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. What? Cade said. Her name. I didn't tell you her last name. I just said Sophia. The boy's eyes were brown, and they were absolutely steady. But you said it. Sophia Mercer. I heard you. He paused. And that tattoo. That says Sophia. The desert had no answer for that. Neither did Cade. Who are you? The boy asked. The ambulance ETA had dropped to 32 minutes. Cade could hear nothing on the highway yet. The wind pressed down on all three of them, and the truck behind them ticked and groaned as the metal settled, and the stars were brutally clear in the way they always were in the desert, indifferent and ancient and giving off no warmth at all. Cade looked at the boy and said nothing. Because what do you say to a child who looks exactly like you did at that age? The same jaw, the same dark hair, the same eyes that were currently taking you apart with a patience no 10-year-old should possess. When the mother you watched buried 3 years ago is breathing on the ground between you, what do you say when the math is that simple and that impossible at the same time? He didn't get the chance to say anything. His phone lit up. Not a call. A notification from the app the Iron Covenant used for emergency situations. 3 words from a contact listed as Vice, which was what they called Dalton Hayes, the chapter's vice president, who had a gift for appearing exactly when things got complicated. Where are you, brother? Not a question. Never a question with Dalton. A statement that meant, I know something's wrong and I'm already moving. Cade typed the coordinates with one thumb and hit send. Then he looked at the road above them and listened, and 30 seconds later he heard it. Not the ambulance, not yet, but the unmistakable low thunder of multiple motorcycles coming from the east, the sound spreading across the desert like a weather system, like the first pressure change before a storm. The boy heard it too. He straightened up, instinctively moving half a step closer to his mother. What is that? He said. Back up, Cade said. 5 headlights crested the ridge 200 yards out and began descending toward them, and the sound deepened and multiplied, and the cold air carried the first suggestion of exhaust and leather and the particular iron and oil smell of machines that had been ridden hard for years by men who treated them the way other men treated old weapons, with respect and intimacy, and a clear understanding of exactly what they were capable of. The boy watched them come. His hand had found his mother's shoulder, and he was holding it the way children hold on to the things they cannot afford to lose. Sophia Mercer hadn't opened her eyes, but her hand, the one that had gripped Cade's arm when he pulled her from the truck, had found his again in the dark, and it hadn't let go. The riders dismounted in the gravel above the ditch without being told what was needed. Dalton came down the embankment first, moving fast for a man with a knee that had been reconstructed twice, taking in the truck and the woman and the boy and Cade's face in one sweep that told him everything and nothing. She alive? Pulse is strong, Cade said. Head trauma, possible ribs, airbag hit. Dalton crouched beside Sophia and looked at her face for a long 3 seconds, in which his own face did something complicated that he immediately shut down. Cade, he said very quietly. I know. I know, Dalton. Dalton stood up. He looked at the boy. The boy looked back at him with those steady, impossible eyes, and Dalton looked back at Cade, and the question he didn't ask out loud was louder than anything the wind was doing. Cade had no answer for it. Not yet. Not until she was awake and coherent and could explain how a woman who had a closed-casket funeral in Flagstaff 3 years ago was currently bleeding and breathing in a ditch off Route 66, with a son who had Cade's jawline and Cade's eyes and the particular specific quality of stillness that Cade had spent 36 years learning to maintain under impossible pressure. The ambulance lights appeared on the horizon. Form up, Dalton said, and his voice carried the authority of a man whose orders had been followed without question for 15 years. The riders moved. 2 went back to their bikes. 1 stayed at the top of the embankment to flag the ambulance. 1 produced a thermal blanket from somewhere. These men always had what was needed, never more, and handed it down to Cade without a word. The boy helped Cade tuck it around his mother. In the ambulance lights painting the scene red and white, his face was pale and determined, the cut on his forehead still bleeding lazily down into his eyebrow. Noah, Cade said. The boy looked up. How did you know my name? Cade hadn't known. He'd guessed. 1 word, instinctive, the name he'd whispered over a grave for 3 years, not because he was certain, but because it was the right name. The name she'd chosen before everything fell apart. The name she'd told him once in a motel room outside Tucson while the rain came down, and she was still certain the future was a place they were both going to live in. The paramedics were coming down the embankment with a board. Cade stepped back to let them work, but Noah didn't move. He stayed at his mother's side until the last possible moment, and then one of the paramedics, a woman with a brisk, kind efficiency, said, "We've got her, honey. You can come with us." And Noah finally stood up and turned to Cade with an expression that was too old for his face. "You're coming to the hospital," he said. It wasn't a request. Cade looked at the boy, at the jaw and the eyes and the stillness. "Yeah," he said, "I am." Above them, Dalton was watching. The Iron Covenant was watching. The desert stretched out in every direction, cold and ancient and holding its silence. And somewhere behind those steady brown eyes, the boy was already working out the arithmetic that Cade wasn't ready to confirm. The tattoo and the name and the face and the timing, all of it adding up to something neither of them had the words for yet. The gurney wheels locked and the paramedics began moving. Sophia's hand slipped free of Cade's as they lifted her, and for a moment it fell open at her side, palm up in the cold air, and on the inside of her wrist, barely visible beneath the ambulance light, was a scar Cade had never seen before. Thin, deliberate, the kind that didn't come from an accident, the kind that came from someone who knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. It was the wrong shape for self-harm. It was the right shape for something removed, something small and subcutaneous, something technological, something like a tracking device. Cade stared at that scar and felt the temperature of the night drop another 10 degrees, and the question stopped being how is she alive and became something much colder and much more dangerous. Someone had put her in that ditch. Not tonight. Tonight was a blown tire and bad luck on a dark road. But someone, 3 years ago, had faked her death and put a leash on her and let her believe whatever they needed her to believe to keep her compliant and contained, and she'd been running tonight because she'd finally found the leash, and she'd gotten far enough to blow a tire on Route 66 before they could bring her back. The ambulance doors closed. Noah was inside. Cade stood in the dark with the Iron Covenant at his back and the wind in his face, and 3 years of grief that had just rearranged itself into something that wasn't grief at all. It was fury, cold and specific and very, very patient. Dalton appeared beside him, said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You going to tell me what's happening?" "Not yet," Cade said. "Get the chapter, everyone available. We ride to St. Anselm's." "That's a federal facility." "Yeah." "Cade." "Get the chapter, Dalton." A pause. The wind. The sound of the ambulance moving away up the highway, growing smaller. "Brother," Dalton said, and his voice had dropped to the register he used when things had moved past being manageable by reasonable men. "What did you see on her arm?" Cade pulled on his jacket and walked up the embankment toward his bike. "Something that means we're already out of time," he said. The Iron Covenant rode in formation behind the ambulance for 41 miles. Not close enough to crowd the paramedics, not far enough to lose sight of the rear doors. Cade held point position, directly behind the ambulance's red wash, and the other 5 riders spread out in the lanes behind him, like a moving wall. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just present in the specific way that men who have survived serious things are present, which is to say, completely and without apology. The desert passed on both sides. The cold was worse at speed. Nobody complained. Dalton rode at Cade's left rear, which was where he always rode, the position he'd claimed 15 years ago and never relinquished, close enough to intervene and far enough to give Cade room. He was watching the back of Cade's helmet the way he'd watched it across 3 states and 2 federal investigations and one very bad night outside of Reno that none of them talked about anymore. And what he was reading in the set of Cade's shoulders wasn't grief and wasn't confusion. It was the particular stillness of a man who had just redrawn his entire map of the last 3 years. That kind of stillness, Dalton knew, was either the most dangerous thing in the world or the most focused. With Cade, it had always been both. St. Anselm's Regional Medical Center appeared at the edge of the flat desert town of Merrow, like a lit argument against the darkness. 3 floors of fluorescent white and safety orange signage. The emergency bay lit up and already moving as the ambulance backed in. The Covenant pulled into the adjacent lot and killed their engines in a ragged, overlapping sequence, the sound dying in stages like a sentence losing its words. Cade was off his bike before the last engine quit. Noah was already out of the ambulance. He'd ridden up front. They'd tried to get him in the back with his mother, and he'd refused with the polite, absolute refusal of a child who understood that watching wasn't the same as helping and that staying calm was the only useful thing he could offer. The cut on his forehead had been butterfly taped by a paramedic en route. He was standing at the edge of the emergency bay with his arms crossed over his chest, not for warmth, for containment, and his eyes found Cade immediately. "They won't let me back with her," he said. "They won't let me either," Cade said. "Not yet." "Why are you here?" The question landed flat and honest. No accusation in it, just the economy of a child who'd learned not to waste words on performance. "Because you need someone here," Cade said. Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Cade at the 6 men arranging themselves in the parking lot. Not clustering, not pacing, just stationing themselves with the unconscious geometry of people who knew how to hold a perimeter. One near the lot entrance, one near the ER doors. Dalton leaning against a concrete pillar with his arms crossed and his eyes on the access road. "Are they going to hurt someone?" Noah asked. "No," Cade said. "But they could." Cade said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Noah accepted it. He turned back toward the ER doors. "She's been running for 2 weeks," he said quietly, the way people say things they've been holding for a long time. "She didn't tell me from what. She just said we had to go. We sold the car, took cash, bought a truck outside Barstow. She kept looking at her phone, then she stopped using her phone. She pulled the SIM out and threw it in a gas station trash can outside Needles." Cade filed every word. "She say anything else?" "She said if anything happened to her, I should find the Iron Covenant." Noah looked at Cade sideways. "I looked you up once. Found an address in Kingman. That's where we were going." The cold was specific and immediate. Cade felt it in his jaw. "How'd she know that name?" "I don't know." The boy's voice didn't waver. But she said it like she'd said it before, like it was something she'd memorized a long time ago. The automatic ER doors opened and a woman in green scrubs appeared. Mid-40s, efficient, the kind of face that had delivered bad news and good news in equal measure and had learned not to lead with either. "You family?" she asked Cade. He opened his mouth. The word that should have come out was no, because that was the accurate word, because he had no legal standing here, because whatever the truth was, it hadn't been confirmed yet, and he was standing on the thin ice of a situation that could collapse several different ways. "Yes," he said. Dalton, 10 feet away, made a small sound that wasn't quite a cough. The nurse looked at Noah. "This your dad?" A pause that lasted approximately 1 geological age. "He might be," Noah said. The nurse took that with admirable composure and told them Sophia was stable, possible concussion, 2 cracked ribs, no spinal involvement, and that she was in and out of consciousness and asking for her son. She took Noah back. Cade stayed in the waiting room and stood at the window and watched the parking lot and the access road and the dark line of the desert beyond both. And the thing in his chest that had been fury 3 hours ago was becoming something more complicated, which was worse. Dalton came in from the cold at 4:47 a.m. He smelled like cigarettes and exhaust, and the specific mineral sharpness of desert night, and he dropped into a plastic waiting room chair with the careful deliberateness of a man with joint damage being circumspect about it. He'd gotten coffee from somewhere, 2 cups, the kind that came from a machine and tasted like hot water with apologies in it. He held one out to Cade. Cade took it, sat down. They drank in silence for a while. The fluorescent light above them buzzed at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious irritation. "You want to tell me about the scar?" Dalton said. "Subcutaneous removal, recent, weeks maybe." "Tracker." "That's what it looks like." Dalton drank his coffee. "Someone had her tagged. Someone had her tagged for long enough that she had to dig it out herself. Or have someone dig it out. Or she found someone who would. Either way, she's been running since it came out." Cade turned the coffee cup in his hands. 2 weeks, the boy said. "She knew where we were. She was coming to us." "She knew the chapter name," Dalton said. "She knew the address." "Yeah." "Cade. How?" The question sat between them in the waiting room light. Outside, the desert was beginning its slow, reluctant move toward gray. The riders were still in the lot. One of them, Reyes, the youngest, 28 years old and 3 tours behind him, and hands that hadn't stopped shaking until about 6 months after he patched in, had produced a sleeping bag from somewhere and was sitting on his bike with it around his shoulders like a molt, watching the access road with the attentiveness that never fully turned off in men who'd spent time in places where not watching meant not waking up. I don't know yet, Cade said. But she said my name to a kid who never knew I existed. She kept it in her head for 3 years, and she still sent him toward me. That's not an accident. No, Dalton agreed. That's a plan. Which means she always knew the plan might get interrupted. Which means she expected things to go wrong before they went right. They sat with that for a moment. Dalton set his cup down. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and his voice dropped to the register that meant he was moving from observation into something more serious. I made some calls while you were inside, asked around. 3 years ago, the accident they told us about, the one in Flagstaff. I want you to actually think about that for a minute, Cade. What did you see? Closed casket, Cade said. What else? Medical examiner's report, dental confirmation. Who signed the ME report? Cade looked at him. I'm asking because I looked it up an hour ago on my phone, Dalton said. County record. Dr. Harlan Voss, Coconino County Medical Examiner. I looked up Dr. Harlan Voss, Cade. He retired 14 months ago. Before that, he had 3 civil complaints filed against him in 5 years. All 3 came from families who disputed cause of death findings. All 3 were dismissed. The fluorescent light buzzed. And here's the one that matters, Dalton said. 2 of those families, 2 of them, had some connection to a nonprofit out of Las Vegas called the Meridian Care Foundation. Medical fundraising, operates about a dozen clinics across Nevada and northern Arizona. He paused. Sophia was a case manager there, you knew that. She left that job before we... Cade stopped. She left it because she said something wasn't right about the funding. Did she tell you what? She said she'd found something. She didn't say what. I shipped out 3 weeks later. He set the coffee down. She was going to look into it more when I got back. The shape of it was assembling itself in the space between them. Not complete yet, too many pieces still dark, but the outline of it was becoming visible the way a bad road becomes visible when the headlights finally swing the right direction. Someone needed her to disappear, Dalton said. Someone with access to a medical examiner. Someone connected to the foundation. Someone who, when she disappeared, also needed her to stay controllable. Trackable. He met Cade's eyes. And someone who would send people after her the second that tracker went dark. The waiting room doors opened. Reyes came in fast, the sleeping bag gone, his jaw set. He crossed the room in 8 steps and stopped in front of Cade and said, Car at the lot entrance. Black SUV, Nevada plates, been sitting there 18 minutes. Hasn't moved. The driver turned the engine off, but the brake lights came on twice. Someone in back is watching the building. Cade was on his feet before Reyes finished the sentence. Dalton stood too, slower, and looked at Cade with an expression that asked a specific question without asking it. Don't move on them, Cade said. Not yet. Cade, we don't know what they're doing here. We know exactly what they're doing here. We know what it looks like. That's not the same thing. He looked at Reyes. Who else is watching? Briggs on the south entrance. Teller's got the service road. Anyone approach the building? Not yet. Not yet. The 2 most important words in a situation like this. They defined the window you had and the window you didn't. Cade went to the window and looked at the lot. The SUV was visible from here, black and still and out of place, the way anything is out of place when it appears somewhere at 5 in the morning with its lights off and its engine cold. Wake the doctor, he told Dalton. The one treating Sophia. Tell her we need to know the moment Sophia is coherent enough to talk. You gonna tell me what you're planning? No. Dalton's jaw tightened. That's not how this works. It is tonight. The hell it is. Dalton stepped in front of him. Not blocking, not aggressive, but present in the deliberate way that said we are going to have this conversation whether you want to or not. I've been behind you for 15 years, Cade. I've ridden into things I didn't understand because I trusted your read. I'm still standing in this hospital at 5 in the morning because I trust your read. But I need something from you right now. I need you to tell me what I'm looking at because those men out there, he gestured toward the window, toward the SUV. They are not here for a conversation, and the woman in that room may be the only living witness to something that gets people killed. I need to know if we are protecting her or if we are making a move, because those are different situations and they require different things from this chapter. The words landed. They were fair. They were exactly what a vice president of 15 years had the right to say. Cade looked at him. The exhaustion was pressing in now from all sides. The 6-hour ride, the ditch, the cold, the waiting room, and underneath all of it, the slow seismic restructuring of a grief that had just been revealed as a crime. We're protecting her, he said. That's the first thing. That's the only thing until she can talk. And after she talks? After she talks, we'll know what we're protecting her from. Dalton held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he stepped aside and said, I'm going to need you to promise me something. What? When this gets worse, and it is going to get worse, you don't go alone. You tell me first. He paused. You went alone 3 years ago, to Kandahar, to the thing you never told us about. You came back wrong, Cade, and it took you 2 years to come back right, and I am not doing that again. Cade said nothing. I need the words, Dalton said. I won't go alone, Cade said. Good. They both knew it was only half a promise, but it was the half Dalton could work with, and they were both the kind of men who understood that half a promise from someone like Cade was worth more than a full promise from most people. The doctor appeared in the doorway at 5:23 a.m. She was young, maybe 30, and she had the composure of someone interrupted from sleep who had learned not to let that show. She's asking for someone named Cade, she said. Dalton looked at Cade. Cade was already moving. The room was small and lit with the specific cruelty of medical fluorescence that made everyone look like they were already dead. Sophia was in the bed with monitors attached and an IV running and 2 cracked ribs taped, and Noah was in the chair beside her with his hand inside hers. And when Cade came through the door, Sophia turned her head and something moved across her face that was not quite relief and not quite terror, but occupied the difficult geography between the two. Noah looked at his mother, then at Cade, then back at his mother. I'll go get water, he said. I was 10 years old, and he read a room better than most adults Cade had known, and he stood up and left with a dignity that cost him something, and the door clicked shut behind him. Cade stood at the foot of the bed. He couldn't sit. He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he put them in his jacket pockets and stood there and looked at her. And the thing about seeing someone who was supposed to be dead was that every second of it was both confirmation and impossible, like a math problem that kept checking out but still felt wrong. You look terrible, she said. Her voice was rough from the airbag, from the cold, from whatever the last 3 years had been. You look alive, he said. Her jaw moved. Her eyes were very bright. I wanted to call you. I couldn't. Don't start there. Cade, start with the foundation. Start with Voss. Start with why there's a scar on your wrist where a tracker used to be. He paused. Start wherever it starts, Sophia. But start at the beginning. She looked at him for a long time. The monitor beeped its patient, indifferent rhythm. The Meridian Care Foundation, she said, was never about health care. I know. No, you don't. She pushed herself up slightly against the pillow, and he could see it hurt, and he didn't move to help her. Not because he didn't want to, but because she was making a point of doing it herself, and he understood that impulse completely. It was a laundering operation, medical billing fraud, insurance manipulation, false patient records, but that's the surface. She looked at the window. Underneath that, it was something else. They were using the clinics to identify people, specific categories of people, uninsured, undocumented, in debt, isolated. People the system had already forgotten. They would run them through, create records, bill for treatments that never happened, and in the process, they built files, complete files. Medical history, financial history, family contacts, personal vulnerabilities. Her voice was steady. And then they sold those files. The silence in the room was absolute. To who? Cade said. Whoever needed leverage. She looked at him directly. Corrupt officials, private debt collectors, people who needed to control other people quietly. The foundation gave them a complete map of someone's weakness and charged accordingly. That's what you found. I found one file. One, before they caught me looking. She exhaled carefully around her ribs. 3 days later, Voss signed a death certificate with my name on it, and I woke up in a house outside Henderson with a device in my wrist and a man named Kellner telling me that my son was safe as long as I cooperated with the ongoing patient management program. The word cooperated came out with a flatness that told Cade it had covered a multitude of things he wasn't ready to itemize. And Noah, he said, they didn't know about you, she said. They checked my history, but you were overseas, and the relationship records were... She paused. We weren't official, nothing on paper. They thought Noah's father was someone else, someone who'd been out of the picture long enough not to matter. She looked at her hand, the one that had held Noah's. I let them think that. To protect him. To protect him from being used, there's a difference. She looked up. They kept me functional. I managed real cases, real patients, did real work while the fraud ran underneath. It was cleaner that way. A real employee with real records and a real face, in case anyone looked. She closed her eyes briefly. 6 months ago, I found a name in the files. A woman who'd been flagged for the leverage program. I knew her. She was real. She had kids. She opened her eyes. I copied what I could. Not everything. I didn't have access to the full database. But enough. Patient records. Billing falsifications. 2 instances of direct extortion correspondence. I hid it. A pause. And then I removed the tracker. Yourself? A veterinarian in Boulder City, she said, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile. He used to be an ER surgeon before he lost his license. He owed me a favor. He was in the files, too. Where's the evidence now? Drive, she said, hidden in the truck. The truck is in a ditch off Route 66. The color left her face. What remained was the specific pallor of someone watching their last option disappear. The drive, she said. Cade, if they get to the truck, I'll send someone now. He was already moving toward the door when she said his name again, differently, and he stopped. Noah asked me, she said, 2 weeks ago, when we started running. He asked if he had a father somewhere. I told him yes. I told him the man's name, she paused. I told him the man was someone worth finding. The monitor beeped. The fluorescent light held its indifferent hum. Cade opened the door. In the hallway, Noah was standing with 2 paper cups of water, and he looked at Cade's face, and the cups didn't shake in his hands, but it cost him something to keep them steady. Cade looked at the boy for a moment. The truck, he said. There's a drive hidden in it somewhere. Did you see where your mother put it? Something shifted in Noah's expression. Not surprise, but the particular expression of someone who has been waiting to be asked the right question. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and held out a small black USB drive between 2 fingers. She gave it to me before we left the truck, he said, before she lost consciousness. She said, give it to the Iron Covenant and nobody else. He pressed it into Cade's hand. In that exact moment, Cade's phone lit up. Reyes, 1-word text, moving. Outside, the black SUV had pulled forward from the lot entrance. It had stopped in front of the emergency bay doors, engine running, and a second vehicle, a panel van with no plates, had come up the service road from the south and was idling at the back entrance, and the night between them was very quiet and very deliberate. The kind of quiet that comes when men who are accustomed to getting what they want have decided they're done waiting for it to arrive on its own. Dalton appeared at the end of the hallway, his jacket unzipped, his face carrying the expression Cade had only seen twice before, both times in situations that ended with someone arrested or someone running, with no middle ground available. Options just closed, Dalton said. Cade looked at the drive in his hand. 3 years of Sophia's survival, compressed into a piece of plastic smaller than his thumb. While outside the hospital, the people who'd buried her alive were parking their engines and making their calculations, and whatever window remained between bad and catastrophic was closing with the specific efficiency of men who did not leave loose ends. He looked at Dalton. We're not giving them the drive, he said. No, Dalton said. And we're not giving them the woman. No, Dalton said again. Which means we're in this. Dalton zipped his jacket. It was a small movement, almost nothing, but it was the movement of a man accepting a weight and distributing it correctly across his shoulders. We've been in it since Kingman, he said. And then the hospital lights went out. The darkness lasted 4 seconds. Not long enough to be a power failure. Exactly long enough to be a message. The emergency generators kicked in with a grinding shudder that sent yellow-tinted backup lights stuttering across the hallway. And in those 4 seconds, Cade had already moved, one hand on Noah's shoulder, pressing him flat against the wall, one hand finding the door to Sophia's room and getting it open, his body filling the frame before the light came back and showed him what he was working with. The hallway was empty. The nurse's station at the far end had gone to emergency protocol. He could hear the charge nurse's voice already, steady and procedural, the sound of a place that had practiced for this. Good. Routine chaos was useful. Routine chaos meant everyone was looking at their checklists and not at the 6 bikers distributed through a hospital at 5 in the morning. Noah, inside, now. The boy went. No argument, no hesitation, just moved into his mother's room and took his position beside the bed with a quietness that Cade recognized as the specific courage of someone who is terrified and has decided not to show it. Sophia was upright in the bed, the monitor still running on battery backup, her eyes fully awake and fully aware. "They're here," she said. "2 vehicles, front and back." "How many men?" "Don't know yet." She looked at Noah. Something passed between them. The compressed communication of 2 people who'd been alone together in a dangerous situation long enough to develop their own shorthand. "There's a fire exit at the end of the east wing," she said to Cade. "I memorized the building when we came in." "I know," he said. "I did too." He pulled out his phone, texted Dalton, "East fire exit, move Reyes there now. Nobody comes through that door." The reply came back in 11 seconds. "Already there, problem at front. They sent someone inside." Cade looked at the drive in his hand. He looked at Sophia. He crossed the room in 4 steps and pressed the drive into the mattress underneath her thigh. Not hidden, but accessible, beneath the one thing in the room that a fast search would have to physically move her to check. "Don't let go of it," he said. "Cade." Her voice stopped him at the door. "The man they'll send first. He'll look like a hospital administrator. Lanyard, clipboard. He'll come in asking about insurance and identification." He looked back at her. "I know what he looks like," she said. "His name is Kellner. He's the one who came to me in Henderson. He's the one who manages the assets." The word assets came out like something she'd had to hold in her mouth a long time and had learned to make neutral. "He won't do anything in front of staff, but he will get Noah alone if he can." "He won't." Cade. Again, his name the same way. "Kellner isn't the top. He reports to someone at the foundation. I never found out who, but whoever it is has been running this for at least 8 years and has never once been close to exposure. When I say this is bigger than you think, I believe you." "I don't think you do. Not yet." He held her gaze for 2 seconds. "Stay in the bed. Don't open the door for anyone without my voice first." He went out. The hallway was beginning to fill with the low-grade disruption of a hospital adjusting to backup power. Staff moving with purpose, one orderly pushing a cart too fast, a set of double doors at the far end swinging open and shut. Cade walked east, his boots quiet on the linoleum, reading every doorway, every face. The emergency lighting gave everything a jaundiced quality, the kind of light that made the healthy look unwell and the unwell look worse. He found Dalton at the junction of the east and central corridors. Dalton was standing very still, which meant he'd already located something. "Second door on the left," Dalton said without moving his eyes. "Came in 4 minutes ago through the main entrance, showed ID to the front desk. Administrator's lanyard, clipboard, the whole package. The desk let him through." Cade looked. The man was maybe 50, trim, with the groomed patience of someone accustomed to institutional settings. Gray at the temples. He was reading something on his clipboard and moving with the casual authority of someone who belonged everywhere and therefore questioned nothing about his own presence. "Kellner," Cade said. Dalton looked at him. Sophia named him. Dalton said nothing, which was the sound he made when he was recalibrating. Kellner turned into a side corridor away from Sophia's room. Cade tracked the movement. Not toward the patient, toward the nursing station. He was going to pull the admissions record. Name, room number, insurance file. The clipboard was a prop. What he needed was 3 minutes at a computer terminal, and he'd have everything. "Teller," Cade said into the phone. "Service entrance. Is the van still there?" Teller's voice came back low and flat. "Van's still there, driver and 1 passenger visible. They haven't moved." "Briggs?" "SUV at the front. 2 men outside the vehicle now. Standing, not entering." A perimeter. Kellner inside to locate, the others outside to contain. Clean and patient, the way people operated when they'd done this before and weren't in a hurry because they didn't think their target had anywhere to run. That assumption was the only thing working in Cade's favor right now. He moved toward the nursing station from the opposite corridor, came around the far side, and positioned himself between Kellner and the terminal before Kellner reached it. He didn't block the path. That would signal. He simply occupied the space, leaning against the counter with his arms folded, looking at the wall-mounted information board with the expression of a tired man waiting for someone to tell him something. Kellner arrived at the counter. Cade didn't look at him. The charge nurse, the same steady voice he'd heard in the dark, appeared. "Can I help you?" "Yes, I'm with Meridian Care's patient coordination office," Kellner said. His voice was mild and practiced. "We have a patient transferred in tonight, Sophia Mercer. I'm here to assist with the insurance verification and coordinate with the attending for continuity of care." "Patient coordinator at 5:30 in the morning?" the nurse said. "We operate 24 hours, Kellner said. The smile in his voice was the kind that had been assembled rather than grown. "We like to be proactive." Cade turned. He didn't say anything. He just turned and looked at Kellner. And the thing about being a certain kind of man, the kind that had spent years learning to be the most dangerous thing in whatever room he was standing in without displaying any of the signals that caused people to call for help, was that you looked at someone like Kellner and you made a specific calculation visible in your eyes. And Kellner, who was good at his job, saw it in approximately half a second. The clipboard came down slightly. "I'm going to need you to step back from the desk," Cade said. Quiet. Even. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume. "I'm sorry," Kellner said. "You're not affiliated with this hospital. You're not affiliated with this patient. You're going to step back from this desk, and you're going to leave this building, and you're going to tell the men outside that we are going to need significantly more time before any further conversation is possible." Kellner looked at him for a long moment. The charge nurse had gone very still in the way that experienced people go still when the temperature in a room changes without anyone touching the thermostat. "I don't know who you are," Kellner said. "I know," Cade said. "That's the point." Something moved through Kellner's expression. Not fear, exactly, but the specific recalculation of a man who has just discovered that the variable he didn't account for is larger than he'd estimated. He looked at Cade's jacket. The Iron Covenant patch. The 15 years of road and weather worked into the leather. He stepped back from the desk. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Cade agreed. "It isn't." Kellner walked back toward the main entrance. Cade watched him go and then looked at the charge nurse, who was regarding him with an expression that balanced concern and professionalism on a very narrow edge. "Security," Cade said to her. Now, and lock down the patient admission records on the terminal." She reached for the phone without another word. Dalton materialized at his elbow. "He's leaving. Front SUV just opened for him. They'll regroup, 15 minutes, maybe 20. What do they do next?" "They stop being patient," Cade said. They moved fast. Back to Sophia's room. Cade first, his knock specific, his voice through the door opening to Noah standing directly behind it, with a metal IV stand in both hands, held across his body like something between a weapon and a question. Cade looked at the IV stand. "Put that down." "Did it work?" "For now." He looked at Sophia. "We're moving. Can you walk?" "I can walk." "Your ribs?" "I've walked on worse." She was already pulling the IV line free with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who'd thought about this before the moment arrived. Her face went gray for a second with the pain of swinging her legs off the bed, but her jaw set and it passed, and she stood with one hand on the bed rail and took her first breath carefully, like a musician tuning before a performance. Noah moved to her side without being asked. She put her hand on his shoulder. The drive was in her palm. Cade opened the door. The east fire exit was 40 meters of linoleum and backup lit corridor, 2 left turns, and a push bar door that opened to a maintenance alley between the hospital and a service building, and Reyes was already there in the alley with his bike running and 2 others behind him, their exhaust white in the cold pre-dawn air, their faces carrying the expression of men who'd been briefed and had accepted the briefing and were now waiting for the part where they were needed. Getting Sophia down the exit stairs cost her something she didn't show on her face, but showed in the way her breathing changed on the 3rd step, shallow and deliberate. Managing the ribs the way a fighter manages a cut between rounds. Noah stayed on her left side. Cade stayed at her back. The alley was narrow and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and old asphalt and the diesel ghost of 1,000 overnight deliveries. The Harleys idled. Reyes looked at the woman and the boy with the particular expression of a young man recalibrating what a mission is. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked. "Chapter Safe House," Cade said. "Outside of Drywell. 40 minutes. They'll follow. Let them try to follow 6 Harleys through the back roads in the dark. She looked at the motorcycles, at the men on them, at the patches and the leather and the collective weight of whatever these men had seen and done and carried. Noah's never been on a motorcycle, she said. He'll be fine, Reyes said from his bike. I've got him. Noah looked at Reyes the way 10-year-olds look at men who seemed capable and unhurried in frightening situations, which is to say, with immediate and absolute trust. Can I sit in front? Noah asked. Yeah, kid, Reyes said. You can sit in front. They moved. The safe house was a converted ranch property 14 miles east of Drywell on a gravel access road that didn't appear on commercial mapping software, sitting on 8 acres of high desert scrub with a low-slung main building, a detached garage, and a clear line of sight in every direction that made approaching without being seen a project requiring significant planning. The Iron Covenant had used it for 3 years. Not for anything illegal, not in the way people assumed when they heard outlaw club and safe house in the same sentence, but for the things the chapter had quietly been doing since its founding: housing veterans in crisis, moving people away from domestic situations that had stopped being safe, providing a place for men and women who had fallen through every net the system offered to land without hitting concrete. The garage was the working heart of it. 2 bays, high ceiling, drop lights on long cords that cast hard shadows, the smell of oil and metal, and the particular staleness of a space that was used practically rather than kept. There were folding chairs, a battered steel table, a coffee maker that had never been cleaned and produced coffee that was aggressively adequate. Sophia sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug and her ribs strapped and a bruise across her cheekbone deepening toward purple, and Cade sat across from her while Noah slept on a folded tarp in the corner with a riding jacket over him, and Reyes sitting nearby doing nothing except being there in the quiet way that some men were good at being there. The rest of the chapter was outside. Dalton was on the radio. The desert was still dark and the cold had settled into the kind of permanence that made the hour before dawn feel like the longest hour in the calendar. Tell me the rest, Cade said. She looked at the coffee. I've told you. You've told me what the foundation was. You haven't told me why they kept you alive for 3 years instead of finishing it. She was quiet for a moment. Because I knew the account structure, she said. The billing cycle ran through me. I was the signature on 112 patient management files per month. Every one of those files was a real person whose real medical history was being coded and misfiled and sold. If I died, the cycle stopped. They'd have to rebuild it from scratch with someone new, and whoever came next would eventually find the same things I found. She looked up. I was more useful alive and controlled. They thought they had you controlled. They did have me controlled. The word came out flat. For 2 years, Cade. 2 years I did the work and kept my mouth shut and kept Noah safe and told myself I was waiting for the right moment. Her jaw moved. The right moment took longer than I expected. What changed? She set the mug down. A name came through the files, 6 weeks ago. She looked at him directly. The name was Dalton Hayes. The garage was very quiet. Cade looked at her. Say that again. Dalton Hayes, Vice President, Iron Covenant MC, Kingman Chapter. He was flagged for the leverage file. Medical history from a VA appointment 3 years ago, PTSD evaluation, alcohol abuse record, the works. Someone had purchased the file and it came through my desk for coding. She paused. That's how I knew how to find you. His file had the chapter address. And when I saw his name, I understood that whoever was running this wasn't just targeting isolated people anymore. Cade stood up from the table. They were going after the Covenant, she said. Dalton was a test run. If the leverage file on him worked, if they could use it to pressure or neutralize him, then the whole chapter became accessible. Every man in it with a VA record, with a history, with something they'd rather not have public. She looked at her hands. They weren't coming for me anymore, Cade. They were coming for you. The coffee maker dripped. The drop light swung in a draft from somewhere. Outside, one of the Harleys coughed as the temperature dropped another degree. Cade went to the garage door, opened it 6 inches, and looked out at the desert and the men in the thin gray line that was beginning to form at the very bottom of the eastern sky. Dalton was 30 feet away, by his bike, talking quietly into his radio with his back to the garage. 15 years. The man had 15 years of Cade's trust, and in exchange Cade had 15 years of his, And that wasn't nothing. That was the kind of thing that gets built in places where trust has a survival value, where you know that the man next to you is either going to hold or he isn't, and you know it not because he told you, but because you've seen it proven. He stepped back inside. The file on Dalton, he said. Did it work? Was he ever approached? I don't know, Sophia said. My access ended when I pulled the tracker. Whatever happened after, I wasn't there for. Cade looked at the drive on the table between them. The case files, the billing records, the extortion correspondence. 2 instances of direct contact. The names on the extortion correspondence, he said. Who are they addressed to? Sophia looked at the drive, looked at him. I don't know the first one, she said. County official, Northern Arizona. The second one. She paused, and something in her face changed, something careful and deliberate, the way a person's face changes when they're about to say something they've rehearsed and are still not ready for. The second one is addressed to a man named Warren Cole. The name hit Cade in a place he hadn't known was exposed. Warren Cole was the man who had filed the insurance claim on Sophia's death. Warren Cole was the man who had called Cade, overseas, to deliver the news in person, because he said Sophia had named him as her emergency contact in the years before Cade shipped out. Warren Cole was the man who had sat across from Cade at a diner in Flagstaff 3 years ago and put a hand on his arm and said she didn't suffer, and she went quickly and had looked him in the eye the entire time with the specific steadiness of someone who was very practiced at delivering news they had manufactured. Warren Cole was a member of the Iron Covenant. He had patched out 8 months ago. Voluntarily. Said he was moving north, wanted a quieter life. Cade had shaken his hand and meant it when he said, "You'll always have a place here," and Cole had smiled and said, "I know," and ridden away, and that had been the last anyone in the chapter had heard from him. The drop lights swung. How long? Cade said. His voice came out different than he intended, quieter, with a flatness underneath it that wasn't calm. How long was he in it? The correspondence dates in the files go back 5 years, Sophia said. She was watching his face carefully. He was in it before I started working at the foundation. He was in it before... She stopped. Before what? She didn't answer immediately. Sophia. He said it the way you say a name when you need someone to finish a thing that can't be unstarted. Before your deployment, she said. Cade, he told them about me. He's the one who gave the foundation my name. He told them I was asking questions and that I had a case manager's access to the billing system. He's the one who flagged me as a risk. Her voice was very level. He's the reason they came for me. He's the reason you got a phone call instead of coming home to me. He gave them 3 years of my life and 2 years of yours, and he sat across from you in a diner, and he looked you in the eye. The garage door behind Cade opened. Dalton came in from the cold. He stopped when he saw Cade's face. The radio in his hand went down. His eyes moved from Cade to Sophia to the drive on the table and back to Cade, and whatever Dalton Hayes had seen in 15 years of riding with this man, he had never seen this particular configuration of stillness and temperature and held breath. What happened? Dalton said. Cade looked at him. At the man who'd ridden 41 miles behind an ambulance in the dark. At the man who'd stood in a waiting room at 5 in the morning and asked for a promise. At the man whose name had appeared in a leverage file purchased by the same operation that had taken 3 years from both of them. Cole, Cade said. Where is he? Dalton's face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. Dalton. I don't... Where is Warren Cole? The pause lasted too long. 2 seconds too long. In 2 seconds, a man can decide 3 different things, and Dalton decided something and then put it down and looked at Cade with the expression of someone who is about to step off a ledge they've been standing on the edge of for a very long time. He called me, Dalton said, 6 weeks ago. I didn't tell you because... He stopped, started again. He said he was in trouble. He said there were people coming after chapter members, and that if I told anyone before he could get clear, it would put the whole chapter at risk. He asked me to buy him time. You bought him time. I didn't know what he was in. I thought, you bought him time, Cade said again. The words were not accusatory. They were worse than accusatory. They were just accurate. Just the simple statement of a fact that had a weight attached to it, and Dalton felt the weight land and didn't try to deflect it. He told me she was already dead, Dalton said quietly. He told me that years ago, and I believed him because you believed him, and because there was a report, and because I had no reason. You had a reason 6 weeks ago, Cade said, when he called. Dalton looked at the floor, at his boots, at the oil stains and the cracked concrete and all the accumulated truth of a place where men brought damaged things and tried to make them functional again. Where is he, Dalton? He's in Marrow, Dalton said. He's been in Marrow for 3 weeks. He said he was trying to find a way out. He gave me a number. He reached into his jacket, produced a folded paper, held it out. Cade took it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the corner of the garage where Noah was sleeping, the jacket rising and falling over him in the slow rhythm of a child who trusted that the adults had arranged the world correctly around him. He looked at Sophia. She was watching him with her hands flat on the table and her ribs and her bruise and 3 years of controlled living behind her eyes. And she wasn't asking him what he was going to do because she already knew what he was going to do. And she was waiting to see whether it was the right thing or the thing that felt like the right thing, but was actually the other thing that cost everyone something they couldn't get back. He looked at Dalton. You should have told me, he said. Yes, Dalton said. We'll deal with that later. I know. Cade folded the paper and put it in his pocket and picked up the drive and looked at everyone in the garage. Dalton, Sophia, Reyes in the corner next to the sleeping boy. And the thing he said next was quiet and specific and without decoration, the kind of statement that a man makes when he has moved past the place where options exist and arrived at the place where only one road continues. Get the drive copied, he said to Reyes. 3 copies, different locations. If anything happens to any one of us before morning, the other 2 reach federal contact. He looked at Dalton. I need 2 riders. Your choice. Nobody who has a family waiting. Dalton looked at him for a long moment. All of them will go, Dalton said. I know. Pick 2, anyway. Cade, Sophia said. He looked at her. Cole isn't the top, she said. I told you that. Whoever is above him. Cole knows who's above him, Cade said. And Cole is in Marrow. He moved toward the garage door. And I have his number. The cold came in when he opened it, direct and absolute, the desert before dawn with its total indifference to what men needed from it. The sky to the east was still gray, not yet light, not yet anything. Behind him, Sophia said, He'll run. The moment he knows you're coming, he'll run, and he'll warn whoever is above him, and they will move everything, and we will have nothing. He won't run, Cade said. How can you be certain? Cade looked out at the desert, and at the riders who were already moving toward him because 15 years of riding together meant they'd read the moment before the moment was announced. And his voice was very flat and very certain when he said it. Because Cole thinks I'm still the man who stood at a grave and believed him, he said, and I'm going to let him keep thinking that until I'm standing close enough that it doesn't matter what he thinks. He walked out into the cold and the gray and the gathered patience of men who had been broken by the world and rebuilt themselves into something the world hadn't accounted for. And somewhere 14 miles west in a town called Marrow, Warren Cole was sitting with a phone and a lie he'd been living for 5 years. And he did not yet understand that the lie had just run out of road. Cade made the call at 6:14 a.m. He stood 20 feet from the garage with his back to the building and his face to the desert, and the phone against his ear, and the gray pre-dawn light made everything look like it was still deciding whether to exist. The number Dalton had given him rang 3 times. 4. On the 5th ring, someone picked up and said nothing. Cade said nothing either. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Long enough to be its own conversation. Cade. Warren Cole's voice was the same voice. That was the thing about it. It was exactly the same voice that had said she didn't suffer across a diner table 3 years ago. The same register, the same careful steadiness. And hearing it now was like pressing on a bruise you'd forgotten was there, and finding it went all the way to the bone. I'm outside Drywell, Cade said. I have the drive. A pause. How did you... She's alive, Warren. The pause this time was different, longer. The kind of pause that a man makes when the structure he's been standing on shifts under his feet and he's calculating whether it's going to hold. Cade, I'm not calling to talk, Cade said. I'm calling because you have a choice that closes in about 40 minutes. You can meet me, or I can hand the drive to people who will find you regardless of what you do next. The drive has your name on it twice. He paused. I want to hear it from you. That's all. I want to be standing in front of you when you say it. Another pause, shorter, the calculation completing itself. Lone Pine Road, Cole said. There's a pull-off 3 miles north of the Drywell Junction. 30 minutes. I know where it is. Come alone. No, Cade said, and hung up. He turned back to the garage. Dalton was standing in the doorway. Behind him, Reyes was on his feet, and Briggs and Teller were already moving toward their bikes with the economy of men who'd understood the situation before it was explained. He'll have people there, Dalton said. Yes. How many? Kellner plus whatever the SUV carried. 4, maybe 5. And whoever Cole's been reporting to? Cade looked at him. Maybe. If the person above Cole decides this is the moment to clean house, then we deal with that when it's in front of us, Cade said. Dalton's jaw tightened. He stepped out of the doorway and pulled it mostly shut behind him, lowering his voice. I need to say something to you. Say it on the road. No, now. He didn't grab Cade's arm. He never grabbed. That wasn't how Dalton operated. But the weight of his presence stopped Cade the same way. What happened 6 weeks ago? Cole calling me. I made the wrong call and I'm not going to dress it up. But I need you to hear something. He paused. He told me they had leverage on 3 chapter members. VA records. He said if I moved on it before he was clear, those 3 men would have their lives dismantled. I have known him for 11 years, and because the 3 names he gave me were real, and what he described was specific enough to be true. His voice stayed even. I was protecting the chapter. I know, Cade said. I should have. Dalton. He looked at him directly. I know. We're past it. Are you with me or not? The question was unnecessary. They both knew it. But Dalton answered it anyway because that was the kind of man he was. The kind that answered unnecessary questions because the answering mattered even when the answer didn't. I'm with you, Dalton said. Same as always. They rode. 6 bikes out of the safe house property in a loose formation, gravel to hardpan, to the access road to the 2-lane that ran north toward Drywell. The sky was beginning to shift. Not light yet, but committed to the idea of it, the horizon bleeding from gray to a bruised orange-pink that had nothing warm in it. The cold was the worst it had been, the hour before dawn always the coldest, and it came through everything, jacket, gloves, the gap at the collar, and asked you plainly whether you were sure about this. Cade was sure. He'd been sure since the garage. Since the name Warren Cole had come out of Sophia's mouth and reorganized 3 years of grief into something with a face and an address and a number that answered on the 5th ring. Lone Pine Road was exactly what it sounded like. A 2-lane blacktop that ran north through high desert with a single row of scraggly pines on the east shoulder that someone had planted 50 years ago for reasons no longer evident. The pull-off was a gravel widening where the road curved, big enough for 3 or 4 vehicles, with a low rock formation on the west side that created a natural windbreak and a natural ambush position, which was why Cole had named it. Cade had hunted in terrain like this before. He knew what it looked like when someone was using geography. He signaled. The formation split, Reyes and Briggs taking the parallel dirt track that ran behind the rock formation from the south, Teller looping north to come in from above. Cade and Dalton came straight in, direct on the blacktop, headlights announcing themselves without apology. The pull-off came into view. 2 vehicles, the black SUV from the hospital, and a second car. A dark blue sedan, newer, rental plate anonymous. 4 men visible in the headlights. 2 he recognized as the SUV passengers from Moreau. One was Kellner, standing with his clipboard gone, and his hands at his sides and his patient administrator's composure, showing its actual architecture, which was something colder. The 4th was Warren Cole. Cade had not seen him in 8 months. He looked the same. Heavier, maybe, around the jaw. Same boots. The man had worn the same style of boot for 11 years, a specific brown work boot he ordered online and replaced every 2 years. And the sight of those boots on the gravel in the headlights was a specific kind of violent, ordinary detail that hit harder than seeing his face. Cade and Dalton killed their engines and dismounted. In the dark behind the rock formation, 2 more engines had also gone quiet. Teller was somewhere in the dark to the north, invisible. Cole looked at Cade for a long moment. You said alone, Cole said. I said no, Cade said. Cole's eyes moved to Dalton. Something passed through them. Dalton looked back at him with an expression that said everything it needed to say, and none of it was forgiveness. Kellner spoke. Mr. Mercer. My employer would like to propose a straightforward arrangement, the drive and the woman, and we conclude this without further. You're talking to me, Cade said. Kellner stopped. Then stop, Cade said. He looked at Cole. Cole had the particular posture of a man who had been running something for long enough that he'd stopped feeling the weight of it and had only just picked it back up and was surprised by how heavy it was. His shoulders were set wrong, his hands were wrong. In 11 years, Cade had watched those hands work on engines, had watched them hold a cold beer after long rides, had watched them grip a steering wheel and a throttle, and on 2 occasions had watched them stop another man from doing something irrevocable. He knew those hands. Say it, Cade said. It's not... Say it, Warren. Cole looked at the gravel, then at the sky, then at Cade, and in his face was something that was probably the closest he'd come to the truth in 5 years, which was not remorse and not guilt, but something more uncomfortable. The expression of a man who knows that the story he told himself about why he did what he did has finally run out of believers, including himself. It started with a debt, Cole said. Mine. Before the chapter, before you. There was a business. It failed, and the debt was the kind that doesn't go to a bank. They came to me with a way to clear it. He stopped. I told myself it was temporary. It's never temporary, Dalton said. No, Cole said. It isn't. Sophia, Cade said. You gave them her name. She was asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. They told me someone was going to look at her regardless, and that if I flagged her first, it would be cleaner. Cleaner, Cade said. They told me they'd scare her off, relocate her, not... He stopped again. I didn't know they were going to do what they did. But you knew she was alive, Cade said. Cole said nothing. You knew she was alive the whole time, Cade said. You came to me in Flagstaff and you put your hand on my arm and you knew. The wind moved through the lone pines. Somewhere to the north, invisible, Teller was listening. Yes, Cole said. The word was quiet, and it was the only honest thing he'd said in 5 years, and it sat in the cold air between them and didn't make anything better and wasn't supposed to. Cade took a breath. Let it out. The breath was visible in the cold, there and gone, like everything. Who's above you? He said. Cole looked at Kellner. Don't, Cade said. I can't. You can. He stepped forward. 1 step, deliberate, and the 2 SUV men shifted and Dalton moved in his peripheral vision, and the geometry of the pull-off changed the way geometry changes when the people in it are done with the part of the conversation that involves words as their primary tool. You're at the end of this, Warren. Every road you've got runs through me right now. Give me the name. Cole's jaw worked. The boots shifted on the gravel. Then Kellner moved. Not toward Cade, toward the sedan, fast, reaching through the open window, and what came out of the window was not a weapon but a phone, and he had it to his ear before Cade covered half the distance between them, and he said 1 sentence into it. Just 1, 6 words. We need the protocol. Do it now. He lowered the phone. Cade stopped. What did you just do? Dalton said. Kellner looked at him with the mild eyes of a man who had just put everything on the table and was content to wait for the cards to land. I activated a contingency, he said. In approximately 20 minutes, a complete package of information will be delivered to the Nevada State Insurance Commission, the DEA, and 3 county sheriff's offices. Patient files, billing records, and the names of 14 individuals who received services from the Meridian Care Foundation over the past 4 years. He paused. Among those names are 6 members of the Iron Covenant Motorcycle Brotherhood, including Mr. Hayes, who sought treatment at a Foundation-affiliated clinic in Kingman in 2021, and signed consent forms that granted the Foundation access to his full medical history. Dalton went very still. The package also includes 2 years of correspondence between Mr. Cole and your chapter's former treasurer regarding the facilitation of certain Foundation activities through chapter-adjacent accounts. Kellner's voice was even and administrative, the same voice he'd used at the nursing station. Whether those records are accurate or fabricated is, at this point, not particularly relevant. Investigation takes time. Reputations do not survive investigation. The wind, the pines, the cold. Cade looked at Kellner. You're telling me you'll burn 14 innocent people to protect 1 operation. I'm telling you, Kellner said, that my employer has been doing exactly that for 8 years and has not once been inconvenienced by it. He tilted his head slightly. The drive you have contains billing records and 2 letters. My employer's records contain significantly more. The question is who moves first and who moves with more. He looked at Cade with something that almost resembled respect. You are not, Mr. Mercer, the most dangerous thing in this situation. Who is? Cade said. Kellner smiled. It was a small, precise smile. The man who built the system you're standing inside of. The man who has been 3 steps ahead of this moment since Ms. Mercer removed her tracker. He paused. The man who is currently standing approximately 40 feet behind you. Cade turned. The road to the south was empty. The desert was empty. The pale ruined light of pre-dawn showed him scrubland and rock and the 2-lane fading into dark. Then the headlights came on. A single vehicle parked without lights on the road. Shoulder 200 meters south, invisible until this moment, and the headlights were pointed directly at the pull-off and the 6 of them standing in it. And in the backwash of that light, a figure was walking up the road toward them with his hands in his jacket pockets and the unhurried pace of someone who has never once in his life needed to rush. Cade's phone buzzed. Reyes from behind the rocks. 3rd vehicle on the south approach. We're cut off. Then Teller from the north. 2 men on foot coming through the scrub from the north, armed. Then, from inside his jacket pocket, a sound. Sophia's voice. From the burner he'd left her at the safe house, the one he'd told her to use only for emergency. Her voice was very controlled and very quiet, and it said, Someone came to the safe house, Cade. 1 man. He showed Noah a photograph. He said, Cade, he said the photograph was of you, in Kandahar, with someone the Foundation has been looking for. He said if you don't stand down, the photograph goes to federal counterintelligence and you spend the rest of your life answering for something you didn't do. The man from the south was close enough now to see clearly. Cade had never seen him before. He was 60, maybe 65, with the lean build of someone who'd been physically disciplined for a long time, and the face of someone who'd made decisions that cost other people things, and had learned to experience that as competence rather than guilt. He wore a jacket that was too nice for the desert at 6 in the morning, and he moved like a man whose primary weapon had always been information rather than force. He stopped at the edge of the pull-off and looked at Cade with the expression of a surgeon who has just confirmed a diagnosis he expected. Mr. Mercer, he said, my name is Aldous Wren. I'm very sorry it took this long to meet you properly. Cole had stepped back. Not away, just back, to the periphery. The movement of a man who no longer understood which side of a line he was standing on, and had decided that distance was a form of neutrality. The drive, Wren said pleasantly, and your word that Ms. Mercer cooperates with a brief transitional arrangement. In exchange, the contingency packet is recalled. The Covenant's members are removed from our files, and you go back to doing whatever it is men like you do on long highways. Men like me, Cade said. Loyal men, Wren said. It wasn't a compliment. Men who believe that protecting people is a sufficient reason to exist. I've always found it, he paused, selecting the word, limiting. Dalton, at Cade's left rear, the position he always held. Cade could feel him without looking. The particular stillness of controlled anger, the breath through the nose, the weight forward on the balls of his feet. Behind the rocks, Reyes and Briggs. Cut off from the south, but present, waiting. Teller, north. 2 armed men between him and the pull-off. The safe house, 14 miles east. Sophia and Noah, and 1 burner phone. And the drive, in Cade's jacket pocket, with its billing records and its 2 letters, and Aldous Wren's name appearing, according to Sophia, nowhere in it. That was the thing. Cade had been listening to Kellner describe the leverage and the package and the containment protocol, and underneath the listening he'd been running the specific arithmetic of someone who spent years in situations where the information you were given and the information that was true were 2 different sets, and you survived by knowing which was which. Wren wanted the drive. Wren had leverage. Wren was here, in person, in the desert, at 6 in the morning. Men who were 3 steps ahead didn't come in person. Men who were 3 steps ahead sent Kellners. Men who came in person were men who needed something resolved cleanly and were not entirely certain the people they'd sent could resolve it. The contingency packet. 20 minutes, Kellner had said. Cade looked at Wren. The packet was already sent, he said, before you activated it. Something moved through Wren's face. Barely. a millimeter of reassessment. The contingency is a threat, Cade said. It's not operational. Because if you send those files to the Insurance Commission and the DEA and the sheriffs, you light up every account and every name in your own system, and you've spent 8 years making sure that never happens. He paused. You don't burn your own house to scare me. Ren looked at him for a long moment. You're more interesting than I expected, Ren said. The photograph, Cade said. Kandahar. Whatever you have, real or fabricated, send it. Send it to every federal agency you can find, because I have spent 3 years with nothing to lose and I am still standing in front of you. And the thing about men with nothing to lose is that your leverage requires them to want something. He looked at Ren directly. I want one thing, and it's not something you can take away, because it is already in federal hands. Ren's expression shifted. For the first time, something in it was not entirely under management. You made copies, he said. 3, Cade said. Before we left the safe house. Different locations, different contacts. All 3 go in the next... He checked nothing, said it flat. 14 minutes, whether I send a signal or not. Dalton breathed out slowly at his left rear. Ren looked at Cole. Cole looked at the ground. Kellner looked at Ren with the expression of a man recalculating on behalf of his employer and not liking the new numbers. The armed men in the scrub to the north were still there. The vehicle to the south was still there. The geometry of the pull-off had not changed. The Covenant was still outnumbered and still outgunned in the conventional sense of those words. But conventional had stopped being relevant approximately 30 seconds ago. You have 14 minutes, Cade said, to decide whether you want to be ahead of this or inside it when it lands. The cold was total. The light was coming, still gray, still reluctant, but coming. The pines moved in the wind with their dry whisper. Ren put his hands back in his jacket pockets. He looked at Cade with the expression of a man performing a final calculation. Not panic, not defeat, but the specific look of a chess player who has found the board in a configuration that requires a move he didn't plan to make this early. Mr. Kellner, he said. Sir. Recall the protocol. Kellner raised his phone. And call Mr. Vance. Ren's voice was even and cold. Tell him we're accelerating the timeline. He looked at Cade. I'm going to need more than 14 minutes, Mr. Mercer. And I think you should understand that recalling the contingency is not the same as standing down. I know, Cade said. It's not the same as us standing down either. The phone in his pocket buzzed again. Not Sophia. Unknown. He answered it. A voice he didn't recognize, female, professional, with the specific cadence of someone accustomed to being believed. Mr. Mercer, my name is Agent Dana Tross, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We received a package approximately 11 minutes ago from a contact associated with your organization. We'd like to discuss the contents. Are you in a position to speak? Cade looked at Ren. Yes, he said into the phone. I am. And I'm currently standing in front of the man who built what you're looking at. He paused. I'd like to give you his location. Ren's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds and settled on the 4th one, which was the expression of a man who has just understood that the game ended before he arrived at the board. Behind him, to the south, the headlights of his sedan went dark. To the north, in the scrub, the sounds of 2 men who had been moving stopped. Cole made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind a person makes when something they've been holding for 5 years finally becomes too heavy to hold in silence. Dalton said quietly, from his position at Cade's left rear. You copied the drive before we left. Reyes had it copied before Sophia finished her coffee, Cade said. And the federal contact. Teller has a contact at Financial Crimes, has had for 2 years. He mentioned it once. I filed it. Dalton was quiet for a moment. Then, you planned this from the garage. From the waiting room, Cade said. When Kellner walked away from the nursing desk, the FBI agent's voice in his ear. Mr. Mercer, location please. He gave it. He gave her Ren's name. He gave her Kellner's name, and the plate of the SUV, and the name Warren Cole, and the address of the Meridian Care Foundation's primary office in Las Vegas, and the name Dr. Harlan Voss, and the names of the 2 county officials in the billing correspondence. And he did it standing in a gravel pull-off off Lone Pine Road, while the sun made its first actual attempt at the horizon and turned the desert from gray to a color that hadn't decided yet what it was. Wren stood very still through all of it. When Cade finished, Wren said, "You understand this doesn't end here." "Most things don't end where you think they will," Cade said. "There are aspects of the Foundation's operation that your drive doesn't cover. People above me who you have no access to. You've damaged something today. You haven't ended it." "I know," Cade said, "but you're going to end it for me. Because the moment the FBI starts pulling the financial records, every person above you is going to make sure you're the last stop on the line. That's how it works with people like you." He looked at Wren steadily. "You built a machine. The machine protects itself." Something moved through Wren's face. The honest acknowledgement of a man who has just heard a true thing about himself, described accurately and can find no argument against it. The sun broke the horizon. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in films, with sudden golden light and warmth arriving like a verdict. It came the way things actually came in the high desert. Slowly, grudgingly, with the cold still holding everywhere the light hadn't directly reached. And the first color was thin and pale and uncertain, and it showed Cade's face and Dalton's face, and the faces of the men in the pull-off, in the raw, unfiltered detail of early light that made everyone look like exactly what they were. Cole was looking at Cade. He had been looking at him for 30 seconds, and in his face was the specific expression of a man who has run out of all the internal stories that made his choices bearable. And what's left when those stories go is just the bare fact of the choices themselves, sitting there in the morning light with nowhere to hide. "I'm sorry," Cole said. The words were real. Cade could tell the difference between real and practiced. He'd been able to tell for 20 years, in places where the difference was survival. These were real. Real. They didn't fix anything. "I know," Cade said. Then his phone buzzed a third time, and it was Sophia's burner, and it was not her voice this time, but Noah's. And the boy's voice was very carefully level in the way it was when he was frightened but had decided not to be, and he said, "The man who came to the safe house isn't here anymore, but there's another car coming up the access road, and it's not any of your guys." Cade was moving before the sentence finished. "Dalton," he said. "Already heard," Dalton said. They ran for their bikes, and the engines fired in the cold morning air, one after another, in the pull-off on Lone Pine Road, and the sound of them rose and spread across the desert, the way it always did, absolute and immediate, and carrying in it the specific frequency of men who have made their choice and are moving toward the thing they will not let happen. And behind them Aldous Wren stood in the gravel with the morning light on his face and watched the Iron Covenant ride away from him at full throttle, and the sound of them was still audible 60 seconds later, 2 minutes later, rising and falling with the terrain, carrying across the empty miles of high desert like something that had been let loose and was not going back. The access road was a mile and a half of packed dirt and loose gravel that wound through scrubland from the highway to the safe house, and at full throttle on a Harley, it took 90 seconds, which was long enough to think, and short enough that the thinking didn't help. Cade ran the numbers as he rode. One vehicle coming up the access road. Sophia had said it wasn't any of his people, which meant it was either law enforcement, possible, given the FBI call, given the copies already in federal hands, or it was the contingency Wren had named before the board turned on him. Mr. Vance. The accelerated timeline. The safe house came into view over the last rise, and Cade had his answer before he reached the gate. The vehicle was a white pickup, civilian plates, parked at an angle across the entrance to the property that was not accidental. The engine was running. One man was visible at the driver's window. The front door of the main building was open. Not forced, open, the way it got left when someone came out in a hurry. Cade came off the bike before it fully stopped, the gravel taking the back wheel sideways as he killed the engine and stepped off in one motion, his body making the calculation that his mind was still catching up to. Dalton was 6 seconds behind him, then Reyes, then Briggs, and the sound of the 4 bikes dying in sequence left a silence that was very loud. Noah was in the doorway. He was standing in the door frame with both hands on the frame at shoulder height, bracing, and his face had the expression of someone who has just done something that cost him something and is assessing what it cost. The cut on his forehead had bled through the butterfly tape. His left shoe had no lace. "He's inside," Noah said. "I locked him in the back room." Cade stopped. "What?" He came in and he said he needed to talk to my mom, and I said she was sleeping, and he tried to go past me, and I... Noah's jaw moved. I got behind him, and I locked him in the utility room. There's a bolt on the outside. He's been hitting the door for about 4 minutes. Cade looked at the boy. The door frame, the missing shoelace. You used your lace to jam the bolt, Cade said. The bolt's loose. It kept wanting to slide back. Noah's chin came up slightly. He's bigger than me, but the hallway's narrow, and he wasn't expecting it. From somewhere inside the building, a rhythmic impact. Someone hitting a door with the flat of their hand, measured, not panicking, the sound of a man who was angry, but controlled enough not to waste himself on the door. Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh and covered it. Cade looked at Noah for one more second, the blood on his forehead, the bare left foot, the set of his shoulders. And something moved in Cade's chest that he didn't have a name for yet, or rather had a name for but hadn't said out loud in a context that applied to this specific person standing in this specific doorframe. Good work, he said. Where's your mother? Back bedroom. She wouldn't let me wake her when the car came up. She said, wait and watch, and don't open the door until I heard your bike. He paused. I can tell which one's yours. Cade went inside. The utility room was at the end of the short hallway. A door with a surface mount bolt that the previous occupant had installed with insufficient screws, which was now held shut by a 10-year-old's shoelace threaded through the bolt housing and tied to a pipe that ran along the baseboard. It was structurally not complicated. It had held because the man on the other side had decided not to commit fully to breaking it, which told Cade something about the man. He untied the lace himself, slid the bolt, opened the door. The man inside was 50, broad across the shoulders, with close-cut gray hair and the hands of someone who worked with them. He was not, Cade noted immediately, the kind of contractor that Wren would have sent for a hard resolution. He was dressed like a man who'd driven somewhere in a hurry, jeans, a flannel shirt, boots with dried mud on them. His expression when the door opened was not the expression of a man caught in an operation. It was the expression of a man who had been sitting in a locked room for 4 minutes, reconsidering the decisions that led him here. Who are you? Cade said. My name is Gary Pruitt, the man said. I'm a CPA from Henderson. I did the books for Meridian Care for 6 years. He looked at Cade steadily. And about 3 hours ago, I listened to a federal agent read me a list of charges, and I made a phone call to the only other person I know who's been inside that foundation long enough to understand what I'm looking at. Sophia, Cade said. She gave me an address. He paused. I brought documentation, physical copies, hard drives, everything. I've been keeping it for 2 years because I didn't know who to give it to, and I was afraid of what happened to the last person who tried to walk it out. He held Cade's gaze. The woman in the back room. She tried to walk it out. I knew that. I didn't help her. I want to say that clearly before anything else. I didn't help her, and I've been sitting with that for 3 years, and I'm done sitting with it. The hallway was quiet, except for the sounds of the building, the wind against the roof, the coffee maker cycling in the garage, the distant rumble of a Harley idling outside where Briggs had stayed with the bikes. Where's the documentation? Cade said. In the truck, under the rear seat. Cade looked at him for a moment longer. The full measure of the man, which took less time than it used to when he was younger and more willing to make people wait for his conclusions. What he saw was someone who had been afraid for a long time and had arrived at the specific exhaustion that comes when fear has gone on longer than a person can maintain it and has curdled into something more useful. Reyes, he called. Reyes appeared at the end of the hallway. Get the truck, Cade said. Everything under the rear seat. Bring it in. He looked at Gary Pruitt. You should know that the FBI is already moving. What you have may duplicate what we've already given them, or it may not. Either way, it goes to them. I know, Pruitt said. That's why I'm here. Cade stepped aside to let him out of the utility room. Pruitt walked into the hallway with the stiff, slightly dazed quality of a man who has just done the hardest thing he's done in years and hasn't yet registered that he did it. Sophia was in the doorway of the back bedroom. She'd heard everything through the door. Cade could tell from the way she was standing, the information already processed, her face doing the specific work of someone who has just learned that a person they'd written off had finally arrived. She looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at her. Sophia, he said. Gary. Her voice was flat and level and carried 3 years of things that weren't going to be said right now, possibly ever. I should have. Yes, she said. You should have. She looked at him for one more second. Is it enough? What you brought? He nodded. It covers the accounts you couldn't access. Names, transfers, the shell companies they use to move the leverage payments. It goes further up than Ren. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief. Something more complicated. The look of a woman who has been right about something terrible for so long that being confirmed doesn't feel like vindication. Just wait. Come sit down, she said. The coffee's bad, but it's hot. She went back inside. Pruitt followed, and Cade stood in the hallway for a moment by himself, with the sound of the building around him and the sound of his own breathing, and let the last 48 hours settle into whatever shape they were going to permanently occupy. Noah appeared from somewhere and stood beside him, not asking anything, just present, in the way he was present. The specific quality of a child who has learned that being next to someone is sometimes enough, and does not require explanation or justification. Cade looked down at him. The jaw, the eyes, the stillness. Your shoelace, Cade said. Noah looked at his bare left foot. I can get it back. Keep it, Cade said. I'll get you new ones. Noah looked up at him. Where? The question was simple and logistical, and contained inside it a larger question that neither of them was ready to address directly, which was what happened next, what next meant, what the shape of the future looked like now that the immediate thing had resolved. And they were standing in a hallway in a safe house in the high desert, with a woman who was supposed to be dead, and an accountant with 3 years of guilt in a pickup truck, and 6 members of the Iron Covenant outside in the cold morning air. There's a diner in Drywell, Cade said. It opens at 7. Is it good? It's terrible, Cade said, but it's open. Noah considered this. Okay, he said. They drove to Drywell in the thin, clean light of early morning, the Harleys running loose and easy on the empty 2-lane with the desert on both sides going gold and rust, and the sky above it doing the slow, unhurried work of becoming blue. Gary Pruitt followed in his truck. Sophia rode behind Cade with her arms around his waist, and her cheek against his jacket, and her cracked ribs making every road imperfection a specific and immediate reminder of the last 24 hours, and she didn't complain about any of it. The diner was called Paulette's, which was either the owner's name or an aspiration, and it sat on the main street of Drywell, between a hardware store that had been closed for years and a laundromat that appeared to be thriving, and it had 6 booths and 4 counter stools and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said Best Coffee in Drywell, which Cade had always found to be both the most honest and least impressive claim he'd ever seen on a restaurant. The woman behind the counter was 60 and had the expression of someone who had seen everything arrive at her counter at every hour of the day and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. She looked at 6 bikers and a woman with a bruised face and a 10-year-old with a butterfly bandage and a man in a flannel shirt who appeared to be arriving from a long personal journey, and she said, How many? All of us, Dalton said. And keep the coffee coming. They pushed 2 booths together. It was tight. Nobody mentioned it. The coffee arrived in thick ceramic mugs that had been washed so many times the pattern was gone, and it was hot, and it was strong, and it was, in the specific context of 5:30 in the morning after a night like the one they'd had, genuinely good, or at least genuinely necessary, which amounted to the same thing. Nobody talked for a while. This was not uncomfortable. These were men who had learned in various difficult locations over various difficult years that silence after a hard thing was not emptiness. It was the sound of people putting themselves back together, and it deserved the same respect as speech. Noah sat between Sophia and Cade. He had both hands around his mug even though it was too hot to drink yet, and he was looking at the table with the expression of someone working through something methodically, and after about 4 minutes he looked up at his mother. Is it over? He asked. Sophia looked at Cade. Cade looked at his coffee. The federal investigation will take months, he said. Pruitt's documentation went to Agent Tross an hour ago. The copies we made are in 3 separate federal contacts' hands. Ren is in custody. He paused. It's not over like a switch. It's over like a storm. The rain stops, but things are still wet. Noah absorbed this. But we don't have to run anymore. No, Sophia said. We don't have to run anymore? Noah nodded once, the nod of someone marking a fact in a mental ledger, and went back to his coffee. Reyes, across the table, was watching the boy with an expression he wasn't aware he was making. Something open and unguarded that sat in his face the way things sit in the faces of young men who have spent too long in environments where tenderness was a liability and are still in the process of learning that it isn't. Dalton ordered eggs for the table without asking anyone. The waitress brought them without commentary. At some point between the first coffee and the eggs, Pruitt told them the rest of it, the account structure, the shell companies, the names above Wren that the Foundation's internal records contained. There were 3. 2 were Nevada-based, 1 was federal, a deputy inspector with the State Insurance Commission who had been protecting the Foundation's billing operations from audit for 4 years. None of the names were dramatic. They were the names of men who wore good suits to work and had families in respectable neighborhoods, and had decided, at some specific juncture in their careers, that the system they were supposed to oversee was worth more to them as something to exploit than something to protect. Sophia listened to all of it with her hands around her third coffee and her ribs and her bruise and the particular expression of someone hearing confirmation of things they already knew but had hoped to be wrong about. "The woman," she said when Pruitt finished. "The one whose file I copied. The one who made me decide to pull the tracker." She looked at him. "Do you know what happened to her?" Pruitt was quiet for a moment. "Her file was marked inactive 8 months ago, which in Foundation terminology means she found a way out or they stopped needing her," Sophia said. "Or she cooperated with whatever they needed," Pruitt said. Sophia looked at the window. The main street of Drywell was beginning to show the first signs of a day starting. A truck going past, a light coming on in the hardware store that had been closed, which maybe wasn't as closed as it looked. "I need to find out which one," she said. "I know," Pruitt said. "Tross may have her file. It's in the package." Sophia nodded and looked back at her coffee and didn't say anything else about it, but Cade watched her file it, the way she filed things. The specific internal movement of a woman who had learned to maintain a list of unfinished obligations and was adding to it rather than subtracting, which was its own kind of damage and its own kind of strength. The eggs arrived. They were not good. Nobody said so. Teller's phone rang at 7:15. He stepped outside to take it and came back 2 minutes later and sat down and ate 2 bites of egg before he said, "Tross confirmed Wren's in federal custody. Kellner too." The 2 men from the SUV were detained at the hospital. They found the contingency packet Kellner was supposed to send. It was staged, like Cade said. The files exist, but they're encrypted, and the encryption key was with Wren, so it was always a threat, not an action. "Cole," Cade said. Teller looked at him. "Cooperative. Already talking. Tross says he gave them 4 names in the first hour." Nobody at the table said anything about Warren Cole for a moment. Dalton, who had the most complicated thing to feel about Cole and had been feeling it quietly all morning, put his fork down and looked at his plate and said, "He built something bad. He let it run for 5 years. None of the rest of it changes that." "No," Cade said. "But he didn't finish it," Dalton said. "He kept not finishing it. Every time it could have gone further, it didn't." He paused. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it today," Cade said. Dalton picked his fork back up. Noah, who had been listening to all of this with the attentiveness of a child who understood that the adult conversation happening around him was a form of education he was not going to get in school, looked at Cade and said, "Who built the Iron Covenant?" The table shifted slightly, not in discomfort, in attention. 4 men, Cade said. 12 years ago. All veterans. All between wars, which meant they were between purposes. They needed something to hold on to, and they built a thing worth holding. Were you one of them? No, I came in year 3. Why? Cade looked at the question. It was a simple question, and it had a simple answer, and the simple answer was also true, which was not always the case. Because they were doing something real, he said. Not for money, and not for reputation. For the people the system had already decided weren't worth helping. He looked at his coffee. I'd spent years being trained to protect things, and then came home and found out the things I was protecting weren't being protected here either. The Covenant was the first place that made sense to me since I left. Noah thought about this. Do they have families? Cade looked around the booth. At Reyes, who had a sister in Tucson, he sent money to every month and called every Sunday without exception. At Briggs, who had a daughter from a marriage that hadn't survived his second tour and drove 4 hours every other weekend to take her to soccer. a teller who had built a functional life from a place that should not have been survivable and spoke about it to no one except occasionally, quietly, to men he trusted in diner booths early in the morning. At Dalton, who had been the closest thing Cade had had to family for 15 years, and had made one bad call in 15 years, and was going to carry it with the same thoroughness he carried everything else. Yeah, Cade said. They have families. Noah looked around the booth too. The same men Cade had looked at. The leather and the road wear and the various ways that hard years settled into a face. Okay, Noah said, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. At 8:30, Agent Dana Tross arrived in person. She was smaller than her phone voice suggested. Early 40s, dark hair, the economical movement of someone who didn't waste energy on anything that wasn't useful. She came into Paulette's with one other agent, and she looked at 6 bikers, and a woman with a bruised face, and a 10-year-old, and an accountant, and the specific landscape of a booth that had been through something, and ordered coffee before she sat down. She spent 40 minutes with Sophia. Cade sat across from them and listened and intervened only once, when Tross pushed for details about the tracker removal in a way that could have created exposure for the veterinarian in Boulder City, and Cade said quietly, "That's not relevant to the Foundation's operation." And Tross looked at him and made a small note and moved on. She had questions for Pruitt that took another 20 minutes. She had questions for Cade that took 5, which were primarily logistical, timeline, the content of the phone call with Wren, the moment the copies were transmitted, and to whom. She did not have questions for Noah, who sat through all of it with his orange juice and his butterfly bandage and his shoeless left foot, and who at one point, during a pause in the conversation, leaned over and asked Reyes in a low voice whether the Harley he'd ridden on was always that loud, or whether something was wrong with it. Reyes said it was always that loud. Noah said he thought so. When Tross was done, she closed her notebook and looked at Sophia directly. "Your identity documentation," she said. "It was maintained in the Foundation systems under your actual name. Everything they created to make you compliant was procedural, not legal. You were never officially dead under federal records, only under the county ME's filing, which we'll move to correct. Your social security record, your professional licenses, your credit history, they're intact." She paused. "You didn't lose your life. Someone tried to steal it, and you got it back." Sophia looked at her for a moment. "That's a very clean way to describe 3 years," she said. Tross acknowledged that with a slight tilt of her head. "It is," she said. "I'm sorry for the version you actually lived." There was a pause in which that apology sat and was real, which was not nothing, coming from someone in Tross's position. "Thank you," Sophia said. Tross left at 9:15, taking Pruitt with her and leaving a card and a case number and the specific professional reassurance of someone who had enough to work with and knew it. The remaining agent swept the parking lot and was gone. The diner was quiet again. The waitress refilled coffee without being asked. They sat for a while longer, the 7 of them in the pushed-together booths, in the specific way that people sit after the thing they've been moving toward has passed, not lost, not empty, but at rest in a way that isn't familiar and takes some getting used to. Briggs paid for everyone. It was a thing he did when he didn't know what else to do, which was its own form of expression and was understood as such. Outside, the desert was fully in mourning. The light was honest and direct and showed everything without apology. The cracked asphalt of the main street, the weathered paint on Paulette's sign, the Harleys lined up along the curb with their road dust and their miles, the way the scrubland beyond the last building went on until it became the kind of distance that asked you what you were going to do with yourself. They stood by the bikes for a while. Sophia stood next to Cade, close enough that their arms were touching, and the morning air was cold enough that it was a choice to stand that close and a different choice to step away, and neither of them stepped away. "I need a place to stay," she said. "While the documentation process clears, could be weeks." "The chapter has a house in Kingman," Cade said. "It's not a house so much as a structure with beds in it, but it's stable." "I'll take stable," she said. "Noah will take stable." Cade looked at Noah, who was standing by Reyes's bike, and asking questions about the engine that Reyes was answering with the patient thoroughness of someone who had just discovered he didn't mind teaching. Noah had his hand on the engine casing, feeling the residual warmth of it, and his face was doing the thing that children's faces do when they're learning something they're going to carry for the rest of their lives. "He has questions," Sophia said. "I know," Cade said. "He's going to ask them eventually. All of them. She paused. He already knows the answer to most of them. He's just waiting to see if you're going to be around long enough for it to be worth asking. Cade looked at her. At the bruise along her cheekbone, fading now from purple toward yellow at the edges. At the lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago and were not entirely from the crash or the night or the ribs. At the specific way she stood, weight slightly back, shoulders set, the posture of someone who has been responsible for a small person's survival for a long time, and whose body hasn't yet received the message that the most acute phase of that responsibility has passed. Tell him I'm going to be around, Cade said. Tell him yourself, she said. He walked over to where Noah was standing by Reyes's bike. Noah looked up when Cade stopped beside him, the same look he'd had in the ditch, steady, direct, waiting to see what the adult was going to do with the moment. You want to learn how it works? Cade said. The engine? All of it. The engine, the road. How to read the weather before it hits. How to listen to the bike when it's telling you something. He paused. Takes a while to learn, right? Noah considered this with the gravity he brought to most things. How long? Years, Cade said. Maybe longer, depending. Depending on what? On whether you pay attention. Noah looked at the bike, at the engine casing where his hand had been, at the long road visible at the end of the main street where it ran out of town and became the two-lane headed east, and east from there became the desert and the sky and the distance. I pay attention, Noah said. I know, Cade said. I noticed. Noah looked up at him. The cut on his forehead would scar faintly, not badly, just a thin white line above the left eyebrow that would be there in photographs 20 years from now, and that he would explain to people without being able to explain all of it, the way most scars work. His eyes were brown, and they were steady, and they were, in the morning light of a small desert town, exactly what they were. Okay, Noah said, that word again. The word he used when he was accepting something real. Dalton came to stand beside Cade as Noah went to show Sophia something on the bike engine that Reyes had explained to him. Dalton stood with his coffee, the last of it, watching the street, and the light, and the particular quality of the morning that was either ordinary or extraordinary, depending entirely on what you'd been doing the night before. We need to talk about coal, Dalton said. Not today, Cade said. Eventually. Eventually, Cade agreed. Not today. Dalton nodded, drank his coffee. You know what the chapter's going to ask, Dalton said. They're going to ask if we're doing this now, taking this on. People in bad situations, foundations with leverage programs, system failures. He looked at Dalton. This specific kind of thing. Are we? Cade looked at Sophia and Noah at the bike, at Reyes standing with them, his hands moving to show something, and the way Noah leaned in to look at what his hands were showing, at Briggs, who had stepped away to call his daughter, standing 20 feet up the sidewalk with his back turned and his voice too low to hear, but his posture doing the whole of the conversation on its own. At Teller, who was sitting on his bike with his eyes closed and his face tilted toward the sun, doing nothing, just receiving the warmth with the concentration of someone who had spent time in places with no warmth available and still found it necessary to register. We've always been doing this, Cade said. We just didn't have a name for it. Dalton looked at the street, at the desert beyond the town, at the long open miles that went in every direction from this specific point on the map, all of them available, all of them eventually arriving somewhere. Warren was with us for 11 years, he said quietly. Not defending, just stating the fact of it, the duration of a thing that had turned out to be more complicated than its duration. I know, Cade said. I thought I knew him. You did know him, Cade said. People contain things that the people who know them don't know. That's not a failure of knowing, that's just what people are. Dalton turned his coffee cup in his hands, a gesture Cade had seen 1,000 times, the physical motion of a man processing something he hadn't finished processing yet. He called me, Dalton said. 6 weeks ago. He sounded scared. He probably was. Yeah. Dalton looked at the cup. I think he was trying to get out. I think he'd been trying to get out for a while and didn't know how, and calling me was the closest he got. He paused. I should have told you then. You should have, Cade said. I know. We're past it. Dalton looked at him. Are we? You rode behind me for 41 miles in the dark, Cade said. You stood in a waiting room at 5 in the morning. You stood in a pull-off with armed men on two sides and you didn't flinch. He met his eyes. We're past it. Dalton nodded once, the nod of a man accepting something that costs him something to accept, which was different from the easy kind of forgiveness and worth more. They stood together in the morning light and didn't say anything else, which was its own kind of language between men who'd known each other long enough to have one. At 10 o'clock they rode. Not urgently, not with the throttle-down purpose of the night before. Just rode, because that's what you did at the end of a thing, because the road was there and the bikes were there, and the desert was asking its old open question about what you were going to do with the distance available to you. Sophia rode behind Cade. Noah rode with Reyes again, up front, one hand on the fuel tank, because Reyes had told him the fuel tank was the part of the bike that told you the most about the road. You could feel through it what you couldn't hear over the engine. And Noah had believed him, and had been paying attention to the tank since Drywell, and was learning what the vibration meant versus what the sound meant, versus what the silences between them meant, which was more than most people learned in their first year. The Iron Covenant rode east on the two-lane in the morning light, 7 bikes and 8 people, leather and exhaust, and the dry smell of the desert warming up around them. And the road did what it always did. Went somewhere, went on, asked nothing, required everything. The safe house would need to be emptied and closed. Sophia's documentation would take 3 weeks, then another 2 for the formal correction at the county level. There were federal depositions coming and a string of follow-up calls from Tross, and at some point the case would have a trial date, and people would be required to appear and repeat true things under oath in rooms designed for exactly that purpose. All of that was ahead. All of it was real, and none of it was small. But it was the morning kind of real, the kind that was manageable, that had a beginning and a process and an end that could be seen from the beginning, which was a different category of real than the night kind, the ditch in the dark kind, the closed casket kind, the kind that waited outside hospital windows in black SUVs, the morning kind of real you could ride into. Kate opened the throttle just slightly on a long straight stretch where the road ran ahead for 2 miles without a curve, and the engine responded with the honest, uncomplicated answer of a machine that knew what it was for, and the desert went past on both sides with its rocks and its scrubland and its enormous indifferent sky, and behind him Sophia's arms tightened briefly around his waist. Not from fear, just from the instinct of someone who had spent 3 years holding on to things she couldn't afford to lose and hadn't yet fully updated to a world where that was no longer the primary mode. He put his hand over hers for a moment. 1 second, 2. She loosened her grip slightly, not letting go, just loosening, into something that wasn't holding on out of necessity, but holding on because that was what you did when you were exactly where you were supposed to be. The bikes rolled east through the morning, and the sun was behind them now, throwing their shadows long on the road ahead, and those shadows moved exactly as they moved. Same lean, same speed, same road, and they were not threatening and not mournful, just present, just the natural consequence of being in the light. Somewhere behind them, in a ditch off Route 66, a truck was being processed by a tow company that would find nothing of consequence inside it because everything of consequence had already been removed by a 10-year-old boy who paid attention. Somewhere behind them, a man named Aldous Wren was in a federal processing facility answering questions that were going to take a very long time to answer completely, and the system that had run on his patients and other people's fear was being disassembled, the way such systems are always disassembled, slowly, with lawyers, in language that was very precise about what happened and very careful about assigning it the correct weight. Somewhere behind them, Warren Cole was sitting in a room cooperating with people he'd spent 5 years hiding from, and whatever that cost him, it was the first honest expenditure he'd made in all that time, and it was buying something real even if what it bought was not what he'd have chosen to buy. The road ahead was Route 77, which would take them to Kingman, which would take them to the chapter house, which had beds and a working kitchen and a garage where Cade had been putting a transmission back together for 6 weeks on a bike that wasn't his, just a bike someone had left because they needed it fixed and trusted that it would be, and it would be, because that was the kind of thing the Covenant did. The ordinary daily version of the same work, taking broken things and working on them until they ran. Noah said something to Reyes that was lost in the engine noise, and Reyes laughed, a real laugh, unexpected, the kind that came out before a person decided whether to let it, and the sound of it was brief and small against the desert, and it was the best sound Cade had heard in 3 years, or possibly longer. He rode. They all rode. The shadows stretched ahead of them on the asphalt, and the road did what roads do, and the desert held them in its old indifferent way that had nothing kind in it and nothing cruel, just the fact of the space and the sky and the miles available to people who were willing to keep moving through them. And the Iron Covenant kept moving, engines steady and worn and honest beneath them, carrying everyone forward into a morning that was cold and clear, and for the first time in a very long time, entirely their own.